The morning light filtered gently through the lace curtains of Evelyn Moore's small cottage, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. At 87, she moved slower than before, but every step held the grace of someone who once danced barefoot in wildflower fields. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her soft eyes, gray, almost translucent, carried the weight of decades and memories she had never fully let go. Evelyn's fingers traced the rim of a porcelain teacup, one she'd had since she was 17. Her tiny kitchen smelled of chamomile and cinnamon toast, but another scent lingered too, faint and ghostly, the scent of jasmine. It always returned when she thought of him. Thomas Delaney. He was the first boy to ever bring her jasmine flowers. It was 1944. She was 17, he was 19, and the world was wrapped in war and longing. He was tall, all smiles and freckles, with hands rough from farm work and a voice that softened when he read poetry. Thomas had a way of making her feel like time paused when he looked at her. The knock on the door that summer changed her life forever. "I ship out next week," he had said, holding her hand with both of his. "But I'll come back, I promise. And when I do, will you marry me?" They'd kissed under the rain that evening, soaked to the skin, laughing and crying and clinging like the world could fall apart at any second, because it might. It did. 3 months later, Evelyn received the letter. It came in a stiff, official envelope. The words inside were brief and clinical. Private Thomas Delaney was missing in action. Presumed dead. No remains recovered. She read it once, then again. Then she dropped it to the floor and screamed without sound. For weeks, she didn't leave her room. The world outside had turned gray, and she wanted no part of it. But Evelyn was strong. Stronger than she ever gave herself credit for. She never married. Couldn't. No one ever came close to Thomas. She went to school, became a librarian, and lived a quiet, almost invisible life in Ash Grove, Ohio. The years passed like leaves on the river, and though she smiled often, her heart never fully healed. The jasmine bush he planted by her window bloomed every spring. She kept his letters in a carved wooden box, dozens of them, written during basic training and from Europe. His last one ended with, "When I get back, let's run. Let's run and never look back." Evelyn never moved away. In some part of her soul, she was still waiting. That Saturday morning began like any other. She sipped her tea, fed the cat, and sorted the mail. A cream-colored envelope, slightly thicker than the others, caught her eye. No return address, just her name in elegant script. Curious, she opened it. The card inside was delicate and floral. A wedding invitation. "You are warmly invited to the wedding of Madison Delaney and Eric Firth." She smiled faintly. A beautiful name? She flipped the card over, and then her hand stopped. "Grandfather of the bride, Mr. Thomas Delaney." The cup fell from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She stood frozen, the card trembling in her hand, her knees weakening beneath her. Her breath came in short gasps, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she was dreaming or dying. Thomas Delaney. No junior, no middle initial. Just Thomas Delaney. It couldn't be him? Could it? Her heart pounded like it hadn't in years. She walked to her bedroom, pulled the wooden box from under the bed, and opened it with trembling hands. The scent of old paper and lavender rose up as she laid the wedding card among the letters. She stared at his handwriting on one of the envelopes, tracing the T in his name. He's gone, she reminded herself. He's been gone for over 60 years. But the name on that card, it wasn't a memory. It was now. Was it a cruel coincidence, or something else? And just like that, for the first time in decades, Evelyn felt something stir inside her, a flame she thought had died long ago. Hope. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window in her worn floral armchair, wrapped in a knitted shawl, watching the moonlight dance on the petals of the jasmine bush. The wedding invitation lay open on her lap. Every few minutes she would glance at it again as if the name might change under her gaze. Thomas Delaney. Her Thomas? No, it couldn't be. He had died. The government had confirmed it. She had mourned, endured, survived. But the sharp ache in her chest now felt eerily like the one from 63 years ago, the one that had split her in two. By morning, her mind was made up. She would go to the wedding. Not because she believed it was really him. That would be foolish, impossible. But a part of her, a small, foolish, beautiful part, needed to see, needed to know. She took the invitation to the little church on Maple Lane, where the wedding was to take place. The woman at the front desk gave her a kind smile when she asked about the event. Yes, the Delaney Firth wedding is scheduled for Sunday at 2 p.m., she said, tapping her calendar. Big family affair. Folks are coming in from all over. Are you a friend of the family? Evelyn hesitated, then nodded slowly. You could say that. The day of the wedding came with blue skies and soft winds. Evelyn wore a lavender dress she hadn't taken out in years, one that Thomas once said made her look like a field of lilacs. She pinned her silver locket, his locket, to the collar. The church was already filling when she arrived. Laughter echoed under the tall rafters, mingling with organ music and the rustle of silk and lace. She took a seat near the back, hands trembling in her lap. She watched the guests file in, trying not to stare too openly. Then her breath caught. A tall man entered the side door. He wore a dark suit, and though he moved a little slower than the others, there was a quiet strength in his steps. His hair was white now, his frame thinner, but Evelyn would have known him anywhere. Thomas. She gasped so loudly the woman beside her turned. He stood near the front, smiling as he greeted the groom and placed a hand on the bride's shoulder. He leaned down to whisper something, and Madison laughed with a warmth that mirrored his. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. It was him. It had to be. But how? He hadn't seen her. Not yet. She considered leaving right then, quietly, before he did. She didn't want to unravel in front of strangers. She didn't want to believe only to be crushed again. But then he turned. Their eyes met. And in that instant, the world disappeared. He blinked. A pause. His smile faded. He took a step forward. Then another. He was walking toward her now, slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a ghost. "Evelyn?" His voice cracked. "Evelyn Moore?" She rose from her seat, her knees weak, her heart thundering. "Thomas," she whispered, her hand to her chest. "Is it really you?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, as if trying to remember a dream he thought he had lost. Then he reached out and touched her cheek. "It's you," he murmured, his eyes full of tears. I didn't think you were real. I thought maybe I made you up." A tear slipped down her face. "I thought you were dead," she said softly. "They told me you were gone." His voice shook. "I was, or at least, they thought I was. I don't know how to explain it, Evelyn. Not yet. But I swear, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." They stood there, the hum of the wedding forgotten, as if time had bent just for them. She reached for his hand. It was warm, real. All those years of silence, all those nights spent alone, wondering, aching. And now, he was here, alive. They sat on a wooden bench just outside the church, beneath the tall oak trees where sunlight filtered in gentle streams through the leaves. The wedding was in full swing inside, but for Evelyn and Thomas, time had cracked open, giving them this quiet corner to breathe, to face what had once been lost. Evelyn stared at him, her fingers still laced with his, afraid that if she let go, he might vanish again. "I don't understand," she whispered. "They said you were killed. A letter came." "Official." Thomas sighed, eyes fixed on the ground. gathering the words like fragile leaves. In late 44, he began slowly. Our unit was ambushed outside Bastogne. I was hit. Badly. They thought I was dead. I must have looked it. When I woke up, I was in a French hospital. No ID. No memory. Just pain. And confusion. Evelyn's breath caught. You didn't remember me. I didn't even remember myself, he said. For months, I was just John Doe. They sent me to a convalescent home in Geneva. Eventually, they moved me to the States, but my memory, it didn't come back. I started a new life. The doctors said it was rare, but not impossible. Severe trauma, head injury. He paused. I lived in Oregon, worked as a carpenter, got married, eventually. She was kind. We had a son, but there was always this ache, this hole I couldn't name. Evelyn swallowed hard. You had a family. I did, he said quietly. My wife passed 15 years ago. Cancer. My son, he's a good man, but I always felt like part of me was missing. His voice broke slightly. Then, about 2 years ago, I had a fall. Nothing too serious, but after that, the dreams started. Vivid, a girl with lilac ribbons in her hair, a letter in the rain, Jasmine. I didn't know what it meant, but it kept coming. He looked at her, eyes shining. And then, one day, I found the box. What box? She asked, barely breathing. In the attic, old, dusty. Someone must have stored it during the move back in the 50s. Inside were photos, letters, a name, your name. And suddenly, like a flood, everything came back. You, our promises, that night before I left. Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks. I've lived without you all my life, she said softly, thinking you were gone. I couldn't love anyone else. I tried to move on, but Thomas touched her hand gently. I thought I'd imagined you, but it was real. All of it. They sat in silence, letting the sounds of laughter and music from inside drift to them like echoes from a different world. Finally, Evelyn asked, Why didn't you come looking for me once you remembered? I did, he said. But by then, I thought it had been too long. I assumed you'd married, had a life. I didn't want to open old wounds. She shook her head. You were the wound, Thomas, and you just reopened it. But this time, it feels like healing. He looked at her, a mixture of guilt and hope on his face. Do you hate me? No, she said quickly. How could I? You came back to me. He nodded, his lips trembling. You don't know how many nights I've prayed for this chance. Inside, the music shifted. A slow waltz began to play. Thomas stood and extended his hand. Would you dance with me, Evelyn Moore, for old time's sake? She stared at him a moment, then smiled, slipping her hand into his. I'd be honored. As they swayed gently beneath the oaks, two souls long separated by war, time, and fate moved together again. Slower, older, but somehow more complete than ever before. The jasmine bush across the path caught a breeze, and for a brief moment, its sweet scent filled the air like a promise whispered by the past. The wedding ended with cheers, clinking glasses, and the joyful chaos of family. Evelyn and Thomas stayed on the edge of it all, present but in their own world. A few curious glances came their way, but no one interrupted. Somehow, everyone sensed the sacredness of what was unfolding. Later that evening, Thomas offered to walk Evelyn home. They took the long route beneath the rows of maple trees turning gold in the early autumn light. The sun dipped low, casting a soft amber glow over everything, like the day itself understood the importance of this walk. Her cottage hadn't changed much in the past 50 years. Still the same white shutters, the same garden out front, though the roses weren't as lively as they once were. But the jasmine bush by her bedroom window? It had grown thick and wild, just like he had planted it. Thomas paused in front of it. You kept it, he said quietly, touching one of the blossoms. Of course I did, Evelyn replied, her voice nearly a whisper. It was the last thing you gave me. Inside, she made tea the way she always had. Loose leaves, no sugar. He smiled at how little had changed, yet how much time had passed. She brought out the wooden box from under her bed. I want to show you something, she said, placing it on the table between them. He opened the lid slowly. Inside were dozens of letters, each neatly tied with faded blue ribbon. He picked one up, eyes widening. My handwriting. You wrote to me from Europe, she said, watching him closely. I kept every word. Read them for years after you were gone. Sometimes I still do. He unfolded one of them with trembling hands. My dearest Evelyn, it began, every day here reminds me of how much I need to come home to you. If this war has taught me anything, it's that love is the only thing that matters. When I return, I'm not letting another minute pass without making you my wife. Thomas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I wrote this sitting in a barn outside Reims. It was raining. I remember. Evelyn nodded. I imagined you writing them, tried to picture your face, your voice. These letters were all I had. He looked at her, full of remorse. I never meant to leave you alone. I would have come back if I could have, if I had remembered. You're here now, she said. That's all that matters. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, the box of memories between them. The air held a quiet reverence, like being inside a church built out of time and longing. I have one more thing, Evelyn said, rising slowly. She walked to her closet and returned with an envelope. Yellowed, sealed, untouched. I wrote this the day I found out you were gone, she said, but I never mailed it. I couldn't. She handed it to him. He looked at her, unsure. Are you sure? She nodded. With care, he opened it. My love, I don't know how to live without you. I don't know how to say goodbye when my heart refuses to let go. If you can hear me, wherever you are, please know that I loved you with everything I had. I will keep loving you until my last breath. Thomas lowered the letter, his shoulders shaking. I never deserved this kind of love, he whispered. You gave it to me first, she replied. Outside, the night settled gently over Ashgrove. Crickets began to sing, and the jasmine breathed its perfume into the dark. Thomas looked at her across the table. What do we do now, Evelyn? She smiled, a soft, tired, hopeful smile. We live. We start where we left off. Even if it's just a little while, I think we owe ourselves that. He reached across the table and took her hand. I'd like that, he said. And just like that, after 63 years of silence, their story began again. The days that followed felt like pages being written in a long-forgotten chapter, gentle, quiet, and deeply sacred. For Evelyn and Thomas, the world had slowed, as if giving them time to remember each other not just through memory, but through touch, through presence, through rediscovery. Each morning, Thomas would arrive at Evelyn's cottage just after sunrise, holding 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with cream, and a little cinnamon, just how she liked it. She would be waiting on the porch in her cardigan, the jasmine behind her in full bloom. They didn't speak much at first. Words felt too small for what they carried between them. Instead, they let silence do the work. They sat together, watched the birds, listened to the wind in the trees. Sometimes Evelyn would read aloud one of Thomas's old letters, and he would close his eyes and let her voice carry him back. Do you remember this one? She asked one morning, holding a folded note. He smiled. The one where I tried to draw that awful sketch of you with the crooked smile? She laughed. It looked like a potato with hair. I was trying to be romantic. You were, she said, eyes glistening. You always were. It was a kind of courtship, slow and tender. Thomas brought her small gifts, a paper crane folded from an old map, a jar of wild honey, a vinyl record of their favorite Glenn Miller song. Evelyn, in return, showed him the life he had missed, her garden, her books, the little attic where she'd kept all their shared ghosts. But there were difficult moments, too. One afternoon they visited the small cemetery where Evelyn's parents were buried. She paused in front of 2 other graves, names Thomas didn't recognize. "My sister, and a man I almost married," she said quietly. "He asked 3 times. I almost said yes once, but I couldn't give him what I gave you." He didn't know what to say, so he just took her hand and held it. Later, he showed her a photo of his late wife, Marion. "She was kind, good to me, but I never loved her the way I loved you." "I'm glad you had someone," Evelyn said. "You deserved kindness even if I couldn't give it." They grieved together, what was lost, what never was, and what they could never fully reclaim. But they also laughed. Oh, how they laughed. They cooked together, badly. One night they burned the chicken and ended up having peanut butter sandwiches and dancing barefoot in the kitchen. Another afternoon, Evelyn tried teaching Thomas how to use her old tablet to play music. After an hour of him poking every wrong icon, she burst out laughing. "You were a war hero, but you can't open a playlist?" He grinned. "Give me a battlefield over Bluetooth any day." One morning, Thomas brought a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" Evelyn asked. "Open it." Inside was a delicate gold chain, and on it a tiny pendant, a miniature compass. "So you'll never lose your way again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She kissed his cheek and he closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the moment. "I feel like I'm 17 again," he whispered. "But this time, I know how precious it is." "You always knew," she replied. "We just didn't get to finish our story. Until now." The days turned into weeks. The trees turned amber and then bare. They knew their time was borrowed, and that made it sacred. On Evelyn's porch, beneath a sky full of stars, Thomas took her hand and said, "I don't know how much time we have, but I want to spend the rest of it with you." She looked at him, her eyes full of peace and quiet joy. "Then let's not waste another second." The seasons changed slowly in Ash Grove, each day cooler than the last, the breeze more insistent, like time whispering reminders that nothing stands still. Evelyn and Thomas didn't need the reminders. They felt it in their bones, in the quiet creaks of their joints, in the soft sighs at the end of long days. But they didn't speak of endings. They spoke only of now. They made a habit of walking each afternoon, hand in hand, through the nearby park where the leaves had begun their grand descent. Children played on swings, teenagers laughed too loudly, and life moved on around them with beautiful indifference. One crisp afternoon, they sat on a park bench near the duck pond, watching the water ripple under the fading sun. "I sometimes wonder what our life would have been," Evelyn said softly, "if the war hadn't taken you from me." Thomas nodded, quiet for a long moment. "We would have married," he said, "lived in a little house, maybe had 2 children, a dog named Baxter. I'd come home from work with sawdust in my hair, and you'd be reading on the porch." She smiled at the picture he painted. "But maybe," he continued, "we would have taken it for granted. Maybe we would have argued over bills or burned casseroles or tired routines. Maybe we needed the distance to truly understand the gift. You think this," she gestured between them, "was always meant to happen like this? I think some loves don't end. They just wait." They sat in comfortable silence watching a pair of ducks glide across the pond. But later that week, the silence changed. Evelyn awoke with a slight shortness of breath. She brushed it off at first, blaming the chill in the air. But the next day she grew dizzy in the garden. And then came the persistent ache in her chest, soft but unignorable. Thomas insisted they see a doctor. The news was not dramatic, not dire, but sobering. Her heart was aging faster than the rest of her. Nothing to panic over, but something to watch. Closely. When they returned home, Evelyn sat quietly in her armchair, a blanket draped over her lap. Thomas made tea with shaking hands. "I didn't think I could lose you again," he said, setting the cup beside her. "You haven't," she replied gently. "I'm still here." "But for how long?" he whispered. She reached for his hand. "For as long as we're given. We don't measure love in years, Thomas. We measure it in moments, in mornings with coffee, in the sound of your laugh, in the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." He blinked quickly, brushing away a tear. "You always were the strong one," he said. "No," she replied. "I was just always waiting for you to come back." In the weeks that followed, Thomas stayed close. He learned how to make Evelyn's soup recipe. He read to her from old books. They listened to Glenn Miller and danced slowly in the living room, his arm steady around her waist, her cheek against his chest. Sometimes at night she would fall asleep with his hand in hers, and he would sit quietly, watching her breathe, memorizing the rhythm, grateful for one more night. Every time she opened her eyes and saw him still there, she smiled as if surprised, and blessed. They didn't need the world to understand what they had. They just needed each other. Snow came early that year. Ash Grove turned white overnight, every rooftop frosted, every tree branch outlined in silver. Evelyn loved the snow. It reminded her of the winters from her youth, coal stoves, thick quilts, and quiet roads blanketed in stillness. Thomas arrived one morning with a thermos of hot cocoa and a scarf he had knit himself. "It's lumpy," he said sheepishly, handing it to her. She laughed. "It's perfect." He helped her outside to the porch where the air was crisp and the world looked like it had been painted in white watercolor. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "We may not have forever, but we have now, and I don't want another second to pass without giving you something I've owed you for 70 years. She turned toward him, confused. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Evelyn froze. "I was going to give you this after the war," he said, voice soft. "But war didn't let me. Time didn't let me. Life didn't let me. But you waited, and I want to honor that." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, the edges worn, but beautiful in its quiet truth. It had a tiny engraving inside. "To Evelyn. Always." Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "I don't need a wedding," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I want to make the promise anyway. In front of the sky and the trees and the snow and whatever angels brought me back to you. I want to be yours, even if it's only for a little while." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You've always been mine," she said. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting too. They didn't call anyone. There were no guests, no bouquet, no music, just the sound of wind through trees and the soft creak of the old porch swing. "I promise to love you for all the days we have left," Thomas said, "and for every day after that." Evelyn leaned forward and kissed him. Slow, tender, full of all the words that neither of them could say without breaking. From that day on, they referred to each other as husband and wife, not because the law had said so, but because their hearts finally had the chance. And in that little house with the jasmine bush and the worn photo frames, they built a sacred new version of forever. Each morning, he woke up before her and watched the light fall across her sleeping face. Each evening, she lit a candle by the window, even if he was already home, just to say, in her own quiet way, "You're still here." They didn't ask for more time. They simply treasured each moment they were given. By January, the snow had thickened, and so had the hush in the world around Evelyn's cottage. Time, it seemed, was slowing to match their rhythm, gentle, deliberate, and full of meaning in even the smallest gestures. One morning, Thomas found Evelyn sitting quietly by the window, a notebook open on her lap. She had been writing more lately, not stories or poems, but memories, snippets of moments, reflections, fragments of the life they almost had and the one they were now living. He watched her for a while before she noticed him. "You're staring again," she said, smiling without looking up. "I'm just making sure you're real," he replied. She closed the notebook gently. "Some days, I don't feel it. I feel like I'm living inside someone else's dream." He sat beside her and took her hand. "What if we write it down?" he asked. "Everything we remember, every piece of our story, so no one forgets." She turned to him, eyes soft with age and memory. "I'd like that." And so they began. Each evening after dinner, they sat by the fire and wrote together, her graceful script beside his clumsier hand. They filled page after page with their past. The first walk by the river, the song he whistled when he was nervous, the yellow ribbon she always wore in her hair. They wrote about the letters, the long years of silence, and the wedding invitation that changed everything. Some pages were tear-stained. Others were full of laughter and inside jokes from decades ago. "Do you remember when you fell into the lake trying to impress me?" Evelyn asked one night, giggling. "I told you I meant to do that. You were shivering for an hour. I still got the kiss, didn't I?" They laughed until they cried. But as the days passed, Evelyn began tiring more easily. Her steps grew slower, her naps longer. One afternoon, while Thomas was trimming the jasmine bush, he heard a soft thud from inside the house. He ran in, heart pounding. Evelyn was on the floor, conscious but pale. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed what they feared. Her heart was simply growing too tired. No procedures, no promises, only time, and not much of it. Thomas sat beside her hospital bed, her fingers barely wrapped around his. "You don't have to stay," she whispered, weak but smiling. "Don't say that." "I mean it. You've already given me more than I dreamed of." He brought her hand to his lips. "I'm not leaving you again. Not even for a minute." She closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked just like the girl he had kissed beneath the rain all those years ago. That night, he brought the notebook to her bedside. "I want to read you something," he said. And he did, page after page until her breathing slowed into a steady, peaceful rhythm. When he finished, she opened her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's ours." He nodded. "It always was." Outside, the snow fell softly. Inside, a love that had waited a lifetime filled every corner of the room. They had turned memory into something eternal, a place to return to. The room was quiet. Machines hummed softly in the background, but Evelyn barely noticed them anymore. The hospital had become a second home in recent weeks, though home to her was not a place. It was a hand in hers. It was Thomas. He was there now, as always, seated in the recliner beside her bed, his head bowed slightly, one hand holding hers, the other cradling the notebook they had been writing together. He hadn't left her side. Not once. Nurses called him stubborn. Evelyn called him faithful. It had been 3 days since her last real meal. 2 since she had opened her eyes for more than a few moments. Yet she still managed to smile when he whispered her name. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, leaning closer. She opened her eyes slowly, the pale blue now clouded with age but still impossibly kind. "Are we almost done?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Thomas swallowed. He had practiced this moment in his mind 1,000 times. It never got easier. "Not done," he said. "Just almost home." She smiled faintly. "I like that." There was something he needed to give her, something he had written the night before, in the glow of a hallway lamp when he couldn't sleep. It was the one thing missing from their story. One last letter, just like the ones he used to write from Europe so long ago. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I wrote you something," he said, gently unfolding it. "May I read it?" She nodded. He cleared his throat, voice unsteady but full of love. "My dearest Evelyn, I was 19 when I promised I'd come back to you. I didn't know the world would steal that promise for so many years, but it didn't break it. I found you again, and every day since has felt like a miracle. You are my home, my hope, and my heart's only true companion. When you close your eyes, and if you must leave before I do, know that I will find you again. In jasmine, in laughter, in every sunrise we missed and every dance we never had. I will love you not just until my last breath, but beyond it. Wait for me if you can, and if not, I'll catch up. Yours always, Thomas. She was crying, barely, just a single tear that slid down her cheek and landed on the edge of his letter. She squeezed his hand, weak, barely there, but full of meaning. "I'll wait," she whispered. And then, gently, like a candle reaching its final flicker, Evelyn Moore closed her eyes and exhaled the softest breath. Thomas didn't move right away. He just sat there, holding her hand, his head bowed. She had waited for him. And now, he would wait for her. The funeral was small. Evelyn had never liked grand gestures. She always said the truest things in life whispered instead of shouted. So the church pews held just a few. Close friends, a couple of neighbors, and Madison, the granddaughter whose wedding had rekindled a love the world had forgotten. But Thomas was there, front row, in the same navy blue suit he had worn the day he found her again. In his breast pocket, folded carefully, was the letter he had read to her. On the altar beside her photograph he placed a sprig of jasmine. "She waited for me once," he whispered to no one and everyone. "So now I'll wait for her." He didn't speak much after the service. People came to offer kind words, but he nodded politely, eyes distant. His heart was full, not just with grief, but with gratitude too. Not everyone gets to say goodbye. Not everyone finds their way back. In the weeks that followed, life in Ash Grove returned to its quiet rhythms. Snow melted, birds returned. The jasmine bush outside Evelyn's cottage began to bloom again, early for the season. Thomas visited daily. He would sit on her porch, sipping coffee, talking softly to the breeze. Sometimes he read from their notebook. Other times he just listened. To the wind, the birds, the distant laughter of children. Listening in case she found a way to answer. One morning, Madison arrived with a surprise. She had finished the notebook. On the final page, in Evelyn's shaky handwriting, was one last entry he hadn't seen. "If you're reading this, my love, it means I've gone on ahead. But don't be sad. You found me. We had our dance. And I'll be waiting for you just like before. Look for me in the jasmine. I'll always be there." He closed the notebook and held it to his chest. "I will," he said aloud. "I promise." That spring, he donated the notebook to the local library, Evelyn's old library, where it was placed under glass in the corner near the poetry section. A small plaque beneath it read, "For Evelyn and Thomas, a love not lost, only delayed." Years passed. One morning, the caretaker of the cemetery noticed something new beside Evelyn's headstone. A second stone, simple and unadorned. Thomas Delaney, 1925-2025. Together again, where time can't find us. And beside the twin graves, the jasmine bush had grown tall, wild and sweet and full of bloom, as if love itself had rooted there. Did this story touch something in your heart? Have you ever loved someone across time, or carried memories that never faded? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Click the heart if this story moved you, and don't forget to subscribe. There's always another chapter waiting. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from?